Hello, this is Pastor Mahlon Smith, pastor here at New Hope Baptist Church here in Watertown, New York, where our vision is living life together by bringing new hope in Jesus to all people. And we are going through a series that we are calling Journeying Through the Bible. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the little book of Obadiah. Obadiah is the smallest and shortest book in the Old Testament, but do not underestimate its value to your life. And we're going to suggest a theme for this book as being avoid misplaced confidence. And let me just begin with a story that talks about misplaced confidence and pride. There was once this turtle, and this turtle had come to know a flock of geese. And the geese became rather enamored with the turtle. The turtle was a very well-spoken creature. And so over the course of time, the geese and the turtle would engage in conversation. And then the time came for when the geese had to fly south for the winter. Well, the turtle was all sad about this, and he didn't want to see his friends go. And yet he wanted to come with them. And so he approached them with an idea one day, and they said, well, we can't take you with us because you're a turtle, we're geese. And so the turtle said, look, I got an idea. Why don't we somehow take a stick and attach it to your feet? I've got a strong mouth. And so all I have to do is just attach myself to the stick with my mouth and hang on. And then you fellas just lift up and go up into the air, and I'll be able to come with you. Well, the geese talked about this amongst themselves, and after a while they said, you know, this sounds like a good idea. And so they did that, and they began to fly. And as they were flying over the Midwest, there was a farmer and his wife, and they were out doing the various chores of the day. And all of a sudden, the farmer looked up, and he saw the flock of geese off in the distance. And as they were approaching, he saw the turtle hanging on for dear life by his mouth onto that stick that was attached to the feet of the geese. Well, the farmer took off his hat, put it on his chest, and he called out to his wife, Margaret, come here. She said, what? She said, look up into the air. She said, what is it? Have you ever seen such a sight? A turtle suspended between two geese. I wondered to myself, whose idea was it to suspend a turtle between two geese? And at that very moment, the turtle had overheard the farmer, and he said, I did. Now let that just sink in for a little bit. That turtle was hanging on by his mouth. You see, though he was a well-spoken turtle, he was a prideful turtle. You see, he had misplaced his confidence. And because he had misplaced his confidence, it cost him very dearly. Dear friend, the book of Obadiah warns us about what happens when you and I misplace our confidence, when we allow pride and arrogance to overtake us, or to perhaps get our focus off of God and onto ourselves. We read in Proverbs 16:18 that pride comes before destruction. And the prophet Obadiah was charged by God to deliver a message specifically to a nation called Edom. Now, the Edomites were descendants of Esau. And let me just remind you that when Isaac had two sons, twin sons, one was called Jacob and the other one was called Esau. And if you'll recall, from Jacob would ultimately come Israel, because Jacob had wrestled with God. God changed his name to Israel. Of course, Jacob had 12 sons, from whence came the 12 tribes of Israel. Meanwhile, Esau, his twin brother, if you'll recall, in Genesis chapter 25, Esau actually had the right of birth. He was in line to inherit all of Isaac's property and possessions and blessings. But one day he came in, he was famished, he was hungry. He begged Jacob to feed him. And so Jacob made a deal, said, look, I'll feed you if you sell me your birthright. And Esau said, fine, I'm just so hungry. And as a result, he forfeited his inheritance for a bowl of soup. And so from Esau came the Edomites. And God told Isaac, and he told Jacob that from there on in history, the descendants of Esau and Jacob would always be in contention with one another. And as you go throughout Old Testament history, we find various episodes where the Edomite people would either try to bar the Israelites from going into a particular area where they were trying to get to in their journeys, or in some respects, if Israel's enemies were attacking them, the Edomites would just simply stand by and not do a thing. And so we see these various episodes in the book of Numbers, Isaiah chapter 34, and other texts that speaks of how the Edomites refused to do the right thing. But we find that what God is going to do, he's going to judge Edom for her pride, for her negligence, for her refusal to do the right thing. Now, ultimately, in history, we know that the Edomite kingdom would be brought to an end. In 553 BC, a king by the name of Nabonidus, who was an Assyrian king, took over the Edomite kingdom, and as a result, the kingdom of Edom came to an end. You may have also heard of Herod in the New Testament. Herod came from a line of people that had Edomite lineage, and so by the days of Jesus, these people were known as the Idumeans, and so they have indirect reference to the Edomites. But God is going to judge the Edomites for their pride, and if we were to outline this tiny little book, we would first note that pride leads to a predicted fall, followed by promised blessing for those trusting in God. And so this is the overall message of the book of Obadiah. It's warning us not to get too caught up in pride, and it's warning us to avoid misplaced confidence. Now, in terms of application, if we were to offer a way in which we could apply the little book of Obadiah to our lives, how could we do it? Let me just point out to you a few texts. For example, in John chapter 12, Jesus tells a parable. A parable, let me remind you, is where Jesus would take a well-known imagery or a well-known object, and he would place alongside of it a spiritual truth or principle. And he says in John chapter 12, Luke chapter 12, verse 15, "Then he said to them, 'Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions.'" That's Luke chapter 12, verse 15. So in Luke chapter 12, we see Jesus warning his listeners not to allow pride to overtake them, because that can distract us from what God is trying to tell us. Then in James chapter 4, verses 6 to 8, we read these words. James chapter 4, verses 6 to 8. "But he gives a greater grace. Therefore it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded." That's Luke chapter 4, verses 6 to 8. And then one final passage of application is found in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you." So as we think about these New Testament references, they help us to understand how we can apply the book of Obadiah. Though this little prophecy is short, it has a lot to say to us, making sure that we do not misplace our confidence. And let me close with one final verse. It's actually the middle verse in our English Bibles. It's Psalm 118 and verse 8. And there we're reminded it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. And so that's my hope for you today. Would it be that we would trust in the Lord, and that we would seek the Lord, and that we would place our confidence in him? Thank you for joining us, and may God richly bless you.